It's not a sports story, but it's a story that has touched the sports world. On February 26, 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was shot and killed in Sanford, Florida. To show their support, the Miami Heat took a team photo where they wore hoodies and posted the images on social media with a hashtag that read, "We are Trayvon Martin." And when the verdict came down on Saturday night, the sports world reacted. Dwyane Wade tweeted, "Wow, stunned, saddened, and as a father, someone make sense of this verdict for me now, please. Don't worry, I'll wait. How do I explain this to my young boys?" Steph Curry wrote, "Watched a lot of the case, thought manslaughter was a definite, thinking about everyone involved, especially the Martin family." Chris Paul tweeted, "Wow, prayers out to the Martin family." Just a few of the messages from the professional athletes who followed the case. So we turn to Stephen A. and I ask you this. Why does this case strike a chord with so many athletes?
It strikes a chord with so many athletes because a vast majority of professional athletes in today's day and age are African-American men. African-American men who are well aware from an historical perspective of the plight we face, particularly that of a younger generation. There's just no doubt about it. To sit here and say that I'm disgusted with the verdict, I think I speak for a lot of people within the African-American community. When the verdict came down, it was stunning, it was depressing, it was hurtful. You found yourself questioning, my Lord, how could this possibly happen? A 17-year-old kid who is unarmed ends up shot dead. We know who the person is who pulled the trigger, and nothing has happened. He walks away scot-free.
Yep.
And so obviously it brings a level of fury in your mind, heart, and soul, and it makes you really, really look at our legal system and ask, what the hell is going on? But you know something? It would be irresponsible for anybody in the public eye to stop right there and to say that's the end of it, because there's another side to it. And the other side to it is our legal system, our justice system, widely recognized as being the greatest in the world. And to be quite honest with you, no matter how anybody feels, including myself, who feels very, very strongly that anybody who shoots an unarmed individual, there should be a price to pay. I don't care what color that kid is, okay? At the same time, there is an obligation to look at the preponderance of evidence that was presented in the courtroom. And I have to acknowledge to you that the prosecutors had the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. George Zimmerman committed second-degree murder. I'm sorry to tell America, they did not live up to that burden. It's just that simple. If you look at the preponderance of evidence that was displayed in the court, Kerry, Skip, if you look at what transpired, we had a medical examiner for the prosecution that showed up on the witness stand and said, "I know nothing." Literally connected his thumb with his index finger and said, "Zero, I know zero, I know nothing." Okay, all I have to go on is my notes. His testimony was highly suspect. The 19-year-old girl, supposedly that was on the phone with Trayvon Martin before his death, her testimony ended up suspect. The father of Trayvon Martin, and my Lord, my heart goes out to him and Trayvon Martin's mother, because you don't wish that on any parent. You don't wish that on anybody. And that's the real tragedy in all of this, that the 17-year-old Trayvon Martin is gone. I applaud the class that they have exhibited throughout this trial, the manner in which they've conducted themselves, the way they've implored our nation to be calm and you know, obviously to refrain from violence. But his testimony on the witness stand in terms of what he heard, in terms of, was that your son's voice? Him initially saying he wasn't sure and then acknowledging that after he listened to it about 20 times, he was sure. It's your son. Nobody wants to hear that you had to listen to something 20 times to be able to tell whether or not it was your son's voice. All of these things ended up being question marks that contributed to the questions that the jury had as to George Zimmerman's guilt. It didn't help the prosecution that when one of the officers came up, because George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watchman, and somebody rolled up, and before they said anything, the guy said, "Hi, Georgie, how you doing?" It was just unbelievable. And it had me looking at the prosecution, because I'm looking at them and I'm saying, what is this? What kind of case is this to bring against George Zimmerman? That's just my reaction. But in the end, what it comes down to, tragically, is that Trayvon Martin is gone. But what it also comes down to is that people need to recognize, I can't applaud President Barack Obama enough for his statement. It was right on the money. And I echo every word that he said. We are a nation of laws. The jury has spoken. You can have the Department of Justice look into things if they want to as to how this case was prosecuted and whether or not it should be revisited. That's not for us to debate. It's inappropriate for me to get to it on that level. But I would tell you that those professional athletes out there who spoke up and were horrified at the verdict, from an emotional perspective, they are justified, because the initial reaction is this young black man, age 17, unarmed, visiting in this neighborhood, was killed. But when you look at the facts that were presented in this case, the fact of the matter is the prosecution didn't make it. And if everybody remembers, whether it's our president saying if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin almost a year ago, whether it's Trayvon Martin's parents, what we wanted was for George Zimmerman to be tried.
Yep.
He was tried. They had an opportunity to present their evidence. And whether they didn't do a good job or not, in the end, what it comes down to, we're a nation of laws and we have to respect it. I think the biggest thing to take from this, Skip and Kerry, is that this stand your ground law, even though that wasn't a case, that wasn't the defense's stance. No. The point is the fact that that law is in effect, and it contributes to supplementing and augmenting the self-defense laws in that state. If we want to do anything, whether it's the NAACP, civil rights activists, or anybody else, what we need to do now is address that law, because clearly there is nothing that we can do to bring Trayvon Martin back.
No. Beautifully said and beautifully framed with a beautiful conclusion. This is tough for me because obviously I cannot begin to feel what either of you felt on Saturday night. I can't begin to relate to the plight you spoke of in your opening remarks. But you do know I have extreme compassion for that plight.
I do know that.
And on my little level, I was very surprised by this verdict. On my little level, I was immediately very disappointed because I had not closely followed the day after day of the case. I was extremely disappointed there was not more black representation on, number one, the jury, 5 whites, 1 minority, all female, or on the prosecution. It just didn't look or smell right to me. And it was deeply disturbing on Saturday night. Then, like you, Stephen A., on Sunday, I spent much of my Sunday watching CNN and all the news channels and listening to lots of highly respected analysts break down a case that I don't really understand because I'm no legal eagle. And I heard several highly respected analysts say, hey, on merits alone, this case shouldn't have even come to trial. Really? Shouldn't even come to trial. Really, that the judge overcharged George Zimmerman with second-degree murder. Really shocking to me, but I don't know what I'm talking about here. So my emotions began to get mixed. All I know for sure is a 17-year-old is gone, and it was avoidable to me. And I stand by what our president said, and you already quoted him. We're a nation of laws, and a jury has spoken. And yet, in the end, the best tweet I read, in and out of sports, came from one Michael Vick. Did you read Vick's tweet?
No, what did he say?
It was so beautiful and so profound and so moving for me. Michael Vick tweeted, and this is, again, I don't need to remind you, this is a man who spent almost 2 years in jail after being convicted as the ringleader of a dogfighting ring. And obviously many in the black community had big issues with that.
Yes.
But this was a Michael Vick who has come far enough to tweet, "I feel so bad for the Martin family. We have a long way to go in America, do we?" But, he continued to tweet, "Please, y'all, don't do anything stupid. Let God be the final judge."
Amen to that.
Amen.
Well,
amen
Thank
to
you
that.
from Michael Vick. Does that not show great maturity on his part?
Great maturity on his
shows,
part.
if you don't mind, I'd like to add something, Kerry, Skip, because I think it's incredibly important to bring this up as well. You know, in the end, as members of the media, we have a responsibility. The fact of the matter is, the facts and the evidence of the case presented in the court of law did not meet what the media was reporting. It did not meet what the media was reporting. There was a bevy of misinformation or misconceptions that was put out there, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. In the end, you know, for me, you picked Michael Vick's quote. I picked the quote that Dwyane Wade that we just put up at the beginning of the segment. This is why I have so much love for Dwyane Wade.
Sure.
Because, you know, I mean, not disrespectful, not overzealous, not overly emotional, devastated by the decision, real in his concerns because he has 2 young sons.
How do I
And
explain this to my young boy?
How do you explain it? I mean, I'm sitting there and I'm with my nephew. I just got off the phone with my wonderful sister Carmen, who you both know, and she has a son. It's my nephew, and you know what she told him? This is months ago. Take off that hoodie. She said, "You are not wrong for wearing it. It's not, it is wrong for people to stereotype you. Okay. It is wrong for people to assume, but what difference does it make if you end up finding yourself in trouble just because you want to say they would be wrong for stereotyping you this way?" There's a responsibility that we have to have. And I'm talking about my community.
Sure.
We have to have a responsibility where everything can't be about being right. Sometimes it has to be about being smart and finding ways to avoid placing yourself in situations where you can ultimately find yourself in trouble you didn't look for and you wanted no part of. It's not always about right and wrong. It's about what the reality of a situation may be and adapting to the circumstances to make sure you don't find yourself in a world of trouble. And there's a lot of young brothers out there. And the concern that I have is people talking about, there's no justice, no peace, and all of this other nonsense. Here's the deal. In the end, don't invite somebody to a fight they ain't ready to handle. You don't need that. We are a nation of laws. The jury has spoken. If the Justice Department feels the need to continue to pursue this case, let them do it. But our president set the tone. It's the right thing for all of us to reiterate that same position because it's the right thing to do.
All right, you guys both touched on something that I think is important. You said you couldn't believe or couldn't even understand what Stephen A. probably went through that night, what I went through that night. Contextualize the pain, because that's what Dwyane Wade is speaking about. That tweet was very painful for him.
It hurt. It hurt. I just stood there and I stared at the TV, and I said, I cannot believe this, but I hadn't been watching the case. I've just been listening, reading the news here and there, but I hadn't been watching the case. So then when I went back and I looked at testimony and I YouTubed the medical examiner and the girl that was on the phone with Trayvon and I YouTubed other witnesses and I said, and I read up on the case again and I'm like, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence?
Agreed, but it still hurts.
It's beyond painful because as a black person in this country, you want to feel like justice is being served. And even though in the court of law, like for example, you got black folks now, even though in the court of law, I understand that the evidence presented didn't, to me, warrant convicting him. At the same time, it had me looking at the prosecutor and saying, what kind of prosecution is this? And then you've got folks in the community looking at it and saying, that's who was appointed? Yeah. Who appointed this guy or this woman? That kind of thing. And that's where it gets dicey. So let's just fall back and let's let it play out and see what transpires from here, because nothing is bringing Trayvon Martin back. Let's address the laws on the books, too, because that's really the most important thing at this point, more than addressing these stand your ground laws and so on.
President Obama released this statement. The death of Trayvon Martin was a tragedy, not just for his family or for any one community, but for America. I know this case has elicited strong passions, and in the wake of the verdict, I know those passions may be running even higher. But we are a nation of laws, and a jury has spoken. More First Take